So we have the old Mar Makomos to finish, and we have some new Mar Makomos as well. But let's go back to the Gemara for a minute. I want to finish off with this ending topic. It's our first topic, but it's a whole, as you can see, a whole fascinating literature. So let me start from the beginning again, just very quickly, because it's all interconnected. So we have the three views in the Mishnah. This is on Tzadi Amud Aleph, page 90a. Hope everybody's able to follow. So the Mishnah says, Beis Shammai omrim lo yigarish adam asishto, elim kein matzah ba'erva sta, dvar erva. Beis Shammai said the only time it's permissible, maybe that there are valid grounds for divorce, is if there's a dvar erva, if there's a betrayal of the marriage vows. That seems like very limited, very specific grounds. Obviously, meaning Beis Shammai is extremely reticent, to sanction divorces. Shenemar ki matzah ba erva stavar. Beis Hillel omrim. Beis Hillel seems to go the opposite way, and says afilu ikticha tavshilo. Even if they're, even if he's angry, the simple reading of Beis Hillel, he's angry at some, breach in. Cooking etiquette, basically another way of saying he's upset, he's angry at the moment, something, more limited. Even that would justify a divorce if that's what somebody wants. Obviously, it doesn't mean that we admire him. We don't. We think that he, is precipitous. We think that he is insensitive, but it's a legitimate still grounds for divorce, meaning we won't try to talk him out of the divorce, and we certainly won't invalidate the divorce. That's the view of Hillel. And then Rabbi Akiva says, "Afilu matzah acheres nahemena shenemar v'haya imot timsachein be'einav." Even if he finds somebody who pleases him more, simple reading of the Mishnah for the moment. So there are three views in the Mishnah, and clearly, as we've discussed, the three belong in two camps. Beis Shammai, who seems to be limiting the grounds for divorce to situations where, understandably, objectively, like the marriage is compromised, as opposed to Beis Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, who are much more flexible. Some might say frivolous. I don't really think frivolous in the end, as we've been discussing, but certainly much more expansive in allowing, choice simply to terminate marriage. That's the Mishnah. Then the Gemara says, Tanya, Amar lo Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, Halo kvar nemar davar. When the Torah uses the expression umatzah ba ervas davar, so why does it use the word davar? Why doesn't it say umatzah ba erva? If it means only a situation of znus. So the Gemara says, Amr lehem Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai said, okay, that's a pretty good question, but I have a question for you. Hello, kvar nemar ervas. What are you going to do with the fact that it does say ervas? And if any excuse is good enough to divorce, then why emphasize erva? Of course, if he wants a divorce for erva, that's obvious. It's much more of a chiddush. It's much more important to teach us that even short of a failure of the marriage, if he chooses, he can terminate it. Says, so this is the discussion that they're having. Basically, they're arguing how to interpret the psukim in the Parshas Kiteitzei. They're arguing about grounds of divorce based on how to read the psukim. Says the Gemara, Amar lahem Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel responded to that and said, Im nemar ervas, v'lo nemar davar. If it just said im matzah ba erva, right? Then says the Beis Hillel, Hayisi Omer mishum erva teitze, mishum davar lo teitze. So that's exactly the point. He's saying, if the Torah used the expression only erva, I would have agreed with you, Beis Shammai. I would have said too that the only valid grounds for a divorce is when a marriage has objectively been betrayed and compromised. The kach nemer, that's why the Torah adds the word davar. Right? It says matzah dvar erva. So the dvar extra word is to show you that it's not limited to erva. Vilu nemar davar, below nemar ervas. If it had only said davar, let's say matzah ba davar, he finds some reason that he's unhappy. It didn't say the word erva. Mishum davar tinase liacher, mishum erva lo tinase liacher. So then you might have thought the following, and this is very, very interesting. You might have thought if he divorces her for any reason other than a betrayal of the marriage contract, then she can remarry. Meaning after the divorce, she can marry someone else. But let's say the reason for the divorce is a betrayal of the marriage. So then, says Beis Hillel, you might have thought that she doesn't have any recourse going forward. Meaning, since she undermined this marriage, she's no longer marriageable. Right? Lekach nemar ervas. So the term ervas teaches you that even if she is responsible for the divorce in a way that anybody can understand, even then there's an opportunity for a new marriage for her. Says the Gemara, Beis Shammai, hi davar my abdile. What does Beis Shammai do with the word davar? Nemar kan davar, nemar lalon davar, al pi shnei edim, o al pi shlosha edim yakum davar. So the suggestion of Beis Shammai is that the word davar it links up with another pasuk in Parsha Shoftim, right? The other pasuk speaks about al pi shnei edim o shlosha edim yakum davar, and that davar means that whenever you want proof in court that a criminal action has taken place, you need two witnesses. So what we're saying is that according to Beis Shammai, in order to establish that some, calamitous betrayal of the marriage has taken place, you can't just speculate about that. There has to be evidence, and that evidence is a sine qua non. It's a requirement for grounds for divorce, according to Beis Shammai. Then the Gemara says, Ubeis Hillel miksiv erva bidavar. It doesn't say erva bidavar. Says ervas davar or dvar erva. Beis Shammai miksiv o erva o davar, ubeis Hillel lachiksiv ervas davar demash mahachi umash mahachi. Okay, so basically the Gemara is establishing that there's a debate between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel that revolves in part around how to read the psukim in Parshas Kiteitzei. Then, if you go a little further, the Gemara says Rabbi Kiva Omer afilu matzah acheres na himena. Even if he finds somebody who is more pleasing to him, where does that come from? B'mai kamifligi, what is that argument about? Rabbi Kiva says that's grounds for divorce. The others seem skeptical about it. Says the Gemara, the Amar Shlakish, ki, the word says ki matzah ba'ervas davar. Ki matzah ba'ervas davar. What does ki mean? So there are four usages in the Torah for ki. Shlakish says, ki Mishamesh b'dalid l'shonos. Ki serves four different language. If. Sometimes ki means if something happens. Dilma, right? Perhaps, worrying about something. Ki, if, right? If, whether, ella, or, ella meaning contrast, or daha. So Beis Shammai Savri, the way to read the pasuk is v'haya imotim tzachein be'enav ki matzah ba'ervas davar means ki matzah ba'ervas davar means deha matzah ba'ervas davar. Meaning the reason for the divorce is that there is evidence that she betrayed the marriage. That's how Beis Shammai reads it. Rabbi Kiva Savar ki matzah ba'ervas davar means inami matzah ba'ervas davar, right? If it's imlo timsachein be'enav, that's a good reason to divorce. Or, right, if matzah ba'ervas davar. So the argument is also a linguistic argument, whether the word ki means, deha, or ki means inami.
But why would you need both? I'm saying, right. So if it's not chen, so then what do you need another erva davar? I'm saying, what do you need?
What does the ervas davar add if you can already end the marriage because of lo matzah chen? So it'll probably that's a great question. The Gemara doesn't ask that question, but based on the previous Gemara, the answer probably is simple. Meaning, the Gemara previously said that in the conversation between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, if you didn't mention Ervas Davar, right, the Erva part, we would know you could get divorced, but we wouldn't know that she can get remarried. We might think that if she betrayed the marriage, that she can never get remarried to anyone else.
Who says, oh, you're saying because Ervas Davar has to be the woman. It can't be the man, of course.
Yeah, Ervas Davar here means her.
It has to be the woman, and therefore there might be an argument to say she can never get remarried, like Sota?
Correct. Means Sota cannot be remarried to him, but a Sota can
remarry other people. So where do you ever see that someone can be barred from remarrying anybody? That's crazy. I mean, we never see that in the world.
It's not crazy, but they
can't marry anybody.
It's not crazy, but it's also not true, right? Last week,
it's true that a woman could. There's a case
I said
a woman can't marry anybody.
No. I said it's not true, but it's not crazy. Last week you wanted to ban the Rabbi Akiva grounds from marrying anybody. You wanted to impose a knas because what I'm saying is you can understand that if somebody betrays a serious covenant of marriage in the worst kind of way, that there can be a thought that makes them not marriage worthy.
Well, if there wasn't Yom Kippur, I'm saying a thief can.
Well, Yom Kippur doesn't. Yom Kippur doesn't solve all problems. I mean, Yom Kippur can solve a personal tshuva problem, but there are still
but the whole point of Judaism is that there are ways to fix your mistakes. So
there are ways to fix many mistakes, but that doesn't mean.
What do you mean? If you steal, there are ways to pay back.
It doesn't mean that all mistakes are fixable in the same way. As it happens, this is not correct. That's what I'm trying to tell you. We're arguing about something that isn't the case. But you're asking me, how could there be what Beis Hillel?
How could there be a havamina that a woman does something bad, whatever it is?
Not something bad. Something that betrays.
Terrible, horrible, horrific, and therefore she's banned from ever being married the rest of her life.
Well, that's not the halakha, but what Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai was, if the Torah had used the word erva, davar, and not erva, then one could have made that, just as she is banned from him, one could have thought that she is simply banned. And therefore the Torah uses the expression.
Even a mamzer can marry a mamzer, so maybe she can marry another.
No. A mamzer is a person who did no wrong. A mamzer is a victim of the, bad relationship choices of its parents. So a mamzer is a total victim. But the idea that there are some, just like midrabanan, we sometimes say, shelo yehe chote niskar, that somebody who does something, completely unacceptable, right? That we impose certain limits or penalties on them. So too, somebody who intentionally, betrays the marriage vows. Again, there's no coming back if there's evidence of it in terms of sota in this marriage, and therefore the Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai, if not for the way that the psukim are written, I might have thought, again, it's a havamina, that there would be no way for that person to remarry. That person would have been disqualified from remarriage. Now, is that a possible logical conclusion? Absolutely. Is it halachically true? No, because the pasuk is written in a way to preclude that conclusion. But is it logical? Is it a possible idea? Sure, it absolutely is. And that's what Beis Hillel said to Beis Shammai.
But just to be clear, that idea would be that she can't marry a Jew, so therefore she could marry a guy, meaning...
No. There's no such... there's no marriage...
You'd be forcing that person. You're basically saying...
There's no marriage between... First of all, just to make it clear, there's no marriage between a Jew and a non-Jew. Meaning...
That's my point.
You're
forcing them out, basically.
A marriage between a Jew and a non-Jew is not recognized by the halacha at all.
Correct.
That's why, intermarriage is completely I'm not talking about the fact that it's a reality in in the United States of
America
of the 20th and 21st. That's a tragedy. But halacha does not recognize intermarriage at all. What we're saying, but what Hillel, this is, I mean, again, I want to spend so much time on it because it's not halachically true, but
not relevant, right?
Well, it's relevant because it's an important thought. The thought of Hillel was that if the pasuk had been written differently, we would consider the betrayal of a marriage to disqualify somebody from a future marriage. Now, if you ask me, is that a ridiculous idea? It's not. Is it severe? Yes. Is it severe, but a reason logical? It is. But it's not the halacha because the Torah said ervas davar. According to Hillel, the reason the Torah said that was precisely to negate this conclusion. Okay. So anyways, for Rabbi Akiva and for Beis Shammai, again, partially the issue revolves on how you understand the word ki. It's a fascinating thing that like the translation of a single word, like ki, does ki mean daha? Does ki mean ella? Does ki mean, im? And so on. The four different potential meanings of one word can have an enormous impact legally on Jewish law. That's what the Gemara is saying. So that's a very remarkable idea.
It has also the key. It depends on the construction of the sentence or the posuk, and whether key is at the beginning of the statement,
could be,
in the middle,
could be.
or
It might. Yeah, that's true. Not all. If the key is at the beginning, for example, ki yikach isha, which is also in the same parsha in Kitetse.
Right.
So there's a debate. What does the key mean in ki yikach isha? So, for example, those who think that it's obligatory to get married say that ki means that. It's just a matter of time. When, let's say, right? Those who think that there's choice in whether you get married, it's not in chiyuv, will say ki means if, right? By the way, this is a discussion between the Rishonim, the Rosh in Masechet Ksuvos says that in his opinion, the word ki means ki kachishisha means if. And the Rabbi Yechiel and others say, no, ki doesn't mean if, ki means when. So again, one word, it's a small word, it's 2 letters, ki, can make
so that would apply. Will that apply only to issues of marriage, or what about Kimitzion, etc., Dvar Hashem Yerushalayim?
Okay, we have to figure out what the alternative could be, but Kimitzion, yeah. There it sounds like that. She, or daha, So anyways, it's very interesting. Okay. Then the Gemara says the following. Let's continue with the Gemara a little more, and then we'll go back and analyze some of the other issues. So the Gemara says the following. Amarle Rapapa Laravo. Okay, we're up to that. Ran Tzadi Amud Aleph, for those of you who lost the place, if you have. Yeah. Was there another question, by the way? I thought I saw somebody else trying to ask something. No? Okay. Amalei Rapapa Larava. Rav Papa said to Rava, Lo matzah ba, lo erva, v'lo davar mahu. Meaning, it says ervas davar, right? And we're saying erva, a betrayal of the marriage, or davar, some lesser issue between them, correct? So let's say there's no issue between them, and he just wants to divorce her. There's no matzah isha nahemena, there's no ikdicha tavshilo, there's no ervas davar. He just, he's, I don't know, mean spirit, whatever it is, he just divorces her. Will that work or not? Says the Gemara, Amarle midigali rachmana gabe ones. The Torah says that in the case of if somebody was ma'anes, a woman, so the husband, the father and the victim can force if they want. If they don't want, then it's up to them. But if they want the anos to marry her, then they can force him to do that. And once he does, the Torah says, Lo yuchal l'shalcha kol yamav, that he can't divorce. He's not allowed to divorce her unless she allows it. But if she wants to remain married to him, he has no right to divorce her. Now, what that really means is not that the divorce doesn't work, but that if he divorces her, then he is obligated to remarry her. Kol yamav va'amod v'hachazir.
Why would he have to remarry her? I'm sorry.
Sorry, what's the question?
Why would he have to remarry her? I'm confused. Why?
He's not allowed. He'd injured her. He damaged her. If she wants him to continue with the marriage, right, then he's not allowed to divorce her. I mean, a way of compensating for his criminal behavior is that. What's the question?
Yeah, I'm sorry, ma'am. What was his criminal behavior? What did he do? He hurt her by doing what?
He forcibly, he I don't know if he raped her, but he basically forced himself upon her.
It's like a fast Torah type thing? Like
No. It's a Nara, Anusa, it's called. Ifas Torah is a non-Jewish woman at the time of war. That's a different story.
So if a man rapes a woman, he has to, his punishment is he has to stay married to her?
It's up to her and her father, initially her father, if they insist that he marry her, he has to marry her. And if he marries her, the Torah says, is in, also in Devarim, lo yuchal l'shalcha kol yamav, meaning he cannot, even though normally a marriage, is open to divorce, since he attacked her and she is the victim, if she insists that the marriage continue, then it's the one case where he has no right to divorce her. And if he does divorce her, then he's immediately obligated to remarry her. That's what the next words mean. Kol yamav ba'amod v'hachazir koi. These are psukim in the Torah. In Parsha.
So no matter how bad the marriage is, it could be like a terrible, terrible relationship. The Torah wants him just to stay with her.
No matter how bad it is for him. If it's bad for her, that's a different story. Meaning she's the victim.
She has an option. He doesn't.
Correct. So the Torah says that's the only case that we have, because again, she is the victim, and therefore we compensate on her behalf. Correct. So the Gemara says that's the only case that we know of where a divorce, will not be final, and there'll be an obligation to remarry. Hasam hu degali rachmana, because he attacked her, and therefore he has to make restitution in this way. Aval hacha my avad. But let's say it's a regular marriage, even according to, now the question is, this Gemara is according to Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel? So if you look at the Gemara, at Rashi on the Gemara, Rashi says this is talking about Beis Hillel. Lo matzah lo erva v'lo davar lebeis Hillel v'girsha mahu mikayfinan lahadura olo. Let's say he has no grounds to divorce her, but he divorces her out of a whim. So the Gemara wants to know, does he have to remarry her? If she wants. If she doesn't want, she doesn't want. Talking about her, since she's been victimized here also, do we say Yada al ha'elyona, she's in a superior position, and we force him to remarry her since he divorced her for no reason? Or no? So the Gemara says no. The only time that we ever force somebody to remarry against their will, if the woman wants, is in a case of anusa. Because there, he, again, he criminally attacked her, before. And if she wants a marriage, again, if she doesn't want anything to do with him, then that's the end of it. And he gets punished and so on. But if she prefers that there be a marriage between them, then we force the marriage, and then we don't allow him to divorce against her will. And if he does, then we force another marriage. However, what we see from here is that in a we see that in a regular case, even if the grounds are not sufficient for divorce, nonetheless, the rule is that b'diavad, the get is kal. Yeah, question.
No, but the Pasuk says it's very clearly, lo yuchal l'shalcha kol yamav, or
yeah.
Kol, I don't know. כל ימיו. לא יוכל לשלחה כל ימיו. Why does the idea...
You're breaking up. It's hard to hear you. I'm not hearing you.
Giving a board to marry her again. I'm sorry. We have a problem. We have an internet problem here.
I'm hearing you now a little bit. Well, what's the question?
Okay.
Oh, maybe I spoke too soon.
As lo yuchal
l'shalcha kol yamav, meaning he took advantage of her.
He has to
he's not allowed to divorce her against her will, and if he does, then he has to remarry her. Meaning
how does he do the divorce? He just writes a book. He needs aiding.
No, he does it. He writes a proper. What's the question? He writes a proper get, and he sends it with a shaliach, or he hands it to her in her hands, with witnesses. That's a get. We're going to discuss that all year, but we already been discussing it. So that's a get.
No, yeah, I know, but it seems that in our time this doesn't really exist because he has to go to the Beth Din anyhow.
Right. In our time, we insist upon a get to be done in the Beit Din, but Medina de Gemara, according to most, is an exception. And I think I mentioned the Yonatan ben Uziel and the or Zarua, and later the Noda Yehuda. Yeah. They think that there really is a requirement of a Beit Din in Gerushin, but the simple reading of the Mishnayos and the Gemaras in Gittin, that Minat Torah there is no requirement. There's a requirement of witnesses, and the get has to be written, properly, but there's no requirement of a Beit Din per se. So the question is, if he goes ahead illegally, against the halacha and he divorces her, so we will insist that he remarry her if she chooses. This is all up to her. She's the victim, and therefore she gets to decide, which of course is fair. That's the halacha's way of trying to, there probably is no remedy, but trying to, as much as possible, at least, to satisfy her wishes, since she was a victim of his improper behavior. But what we're saying is that's the only case in the Torah where we find lo yuchal l'shalcha kol yamav. It's interesting, even that doesn't turn into an invalid get. It means that the get is chal, but at least he has to remarry her. That's what it means. Ba'amod v'hachazir. He has to, marry her again. But in a case where, let's say there weren't let's say regular marriage, no chalila, no other things, just a regular marriage, and now he wants to get out of the marriage, but he has no excuse really, not even a k'ticha tavshilo, not even matzah isha na'imena, certainly not matzah ba'ervas davar. So he goes ahead and he divorces her. He's not supposed to do that, but if he does it, are we going to push him to remarry her? Says the Gemara, no, only in the case of anusa do we do that. So b'diavad, even if he did the wrong thing, the get will be chal. Okay, everybody with me?
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's just go a little bit further before we go back and circle of some other things. So the Gemara says as follows. Amali Rav Misharshia l'Rava. Very interesting now. Rav Misharshia said to Rava, Im libo l'garsha, okay, let's say he has decided in his heart, he's come to a conclusion that he's going to divorce his wife, right? And he hasn't told her, right? So now the question is, but he hasn't divorced her yet either. He hasn't served the papers. He hasn't even drawn up the get necessarily. But he's made a decision for himself. So and she's still living with him, and she's unaware. Umishamshaso mao. Now what does the word umishamshaso mean? So most of the Rishonim interpret umishamshaso as referring to the physical relationship between them. Meaning, can he continue the physical relationship between them, even if he's decided quietly that he's going to divorce her? Obviously, that's very despicable. And that is the antithesis of relating to marriage and to this person in a dignified and sanctified way.
We're saying in general, if someone decides that they're going to divorce someone, can they be with them
Correct.
intimately? Is that the question?
Yes, that's exactly the question.
But
Ravid, let me say something else.
Ravid, how do you define decide?
Decides mean that he has decided definitively. He hasn't executed yet, but he's come to a definitive decision that this is what he's going to do. Now, if he changes his mind, then he changes his mind. But while he's decided in a state of, I'm going to file for divorce, right? I'm going to divorce. He knows that he's not thinking I might, perhaps. He's saying I'm going to do that. Now, again, if he changes his mind, then of course he can continue the marriage. But if he does, until he changes his mind, or assuming he doesn't change his mind, but he hasn't done anything, meaning they are married on paper, she doesn't even know, she probably knows that there's friction between them, but she's unaware that he has come to the conclusion that he is going to divorce. The question is, since legally they're married, can that relationship continue? Or since, it's antithetical to her dignity and to the sanctity of the marriage, since, basically they're planning, or he's planning, on a divorce, what's the halacha?
So I'm just thinking of a hypothetical case. Let's say you have a couple, they both agree they're divorced, and they decide to be together intimately. They're both at fault?
I'll get to that in a second. That's a great question. I should have put the Rambam on the sheet, but I didn't. But I'll read it to you.
And what lob would they be over anyway? Like at the end of the day, what is that?
It's not a lav, but it's a it's based on psukim. We'll see in a moment in Mishlei. It's more of a judgment than a lav. So before I get to that, let me tell you. But I'm going to answer your hypothetical because it's a great question in just one more second. So So first, what does the Gemara say here? So the Gemara says one more time. Im Amar le Rav Mishar Shil Rabba, Im Liba Lagarsha, in his heart has been, he's made up his mind to get divorced. V'hio Shevas Taktav, but she's still living with him. Umisham Shaso Mao. Now Misham Shaso means, according to most Rishonim, continuing their intimate relationship. But the Ravid, let me just share this with you. The Ravid on the Rif, the Ravid, one of the first tier people that we spoke of before, right, Rabbi Roth? The Ravid? An older colleague of the Meiri in Provence. So the Ravid it wrote a commentary on the Rif. It's very sporadic. So on this daf, in this last daf of Gittin, the Ravid in his commentary says, in his opinion, the word umisham shaso here doesn't mean to continue their physical relationship. Why? He says, that is so obvious that that's inappropriate that Rav Misharsha didn't ask Rabbi that. It's obvious. It would be despicable, for that to happen. However, he says what misham shaso can also mean, does errands for, does work for. Like there's a certain, division of labor in the marriage.
There's also a mitzvah of ona.
Well, the mitzvah of ona is back to the intimate part, but that's right. I mean, there's no mitzvah of ona if he's about to divorce her, right? So
you're saying I never heard that till tonight.
Well, what the Ravid says...
In other words, the mitzvah of ona should apply until they get divorced. Until they're divorced, it should be there. He has to feed her. He has to feed her. He has to clothe her. He has all the other responsibilities.
Right. And we understand. Right. I mean, when it comes to parnas...
you're either married or you're divorced. This is like an in-between stage. We're creating a third scenario. You're married, divorced, or you're about to get divorced. Let's create this new.
When you're about to get divorced, and which means that the sanctified, bond between husband and wife, has basically, been destroyed.
I can hear an argument. You're not divorced until you're divorced. A lot of people are about to get divorced. They never get divorced. So what does it mean about to get divorced? You're not divorced.
That we're trying to figure out whether he, in his state of certainty, I'll repeat it again.
But people change their mind all the time. I mean, come on.
So when he changes his mind, he changes his mind.
You're about to sell a building, but until you sell it, you didn't sell it. I mean, people are about to do a lot of things in life that they never do.
That's true. And if he changes his mind, then everybody will agree that they can continue their life together. However, if at the moment that he is not just thinking about it, but he has come to a decision, a certain decision about it, surely you could understand that, it might be very inappropriate, for him at that point to exploit the relationship. Again, I'll get to your question in a second, which is what if she is interested, let's say she acquiesces. But in the moment he hasn't even told her, right?
So to be clear, so you're the case that we're talking about is where it's his decision and she's not aware of it at all, and therefore it's like he's deceptive.
Well, it's both deceptive.
But in a case where they're both consenting adults and
we'll get to that in a second. So if you look, I'm just going to read to you from the language of the Rabbi just for a minute because it's relating to this problem. As you can see, these are very interesting issues, correct? Basically, what we're discussing, as you correctly put it, is when a marriage is over in one respect or might be over, is it over until it's over, right? And if so,
this is the opposite of Yogi Berra.
I guess
before it's over.
Yeah, it's Yogi's your type tonight. Is that true? No, I'm sorry. Somebody like that. Okay, so listen to this. This is what the Ravid says. Lo albia ka'amar. This question of Rav Misharshia, asked to Rava, is not referring to the intimate, physical relationship of husband and wife. Tahainu libnei grusha salev she'amru ben Adarim. I'm going to read you the Gemara in Adarim in a minute. Everybody should get the previous Marmakomos out because we still have to use them. The Gemara in Adarim. He said, that's obvious, of course, if he hasn't told her, but he himself has come to a definitive conclusion that he's divorcing her. That's called grusha salev. That means in his heart, he looks at her as not his wife anymore, but as somebody he's about to divorce. That would be despicable, exploitive, a violation of sanctity for him to be intimately living with her. The samcho osa al mikrazeh ubarosi mikem haposhim v'hamordim. Right? It's a strong language that the Gemara quotes in the Darim from one of the Psukim. It's like a merida. It's an act of betrayal to do that. Not to tell her and to continue to live with her is an act of betrayal. El al shimush acher imumutar lahashosa etzel kedei l'shamsho. Right? The Gemara's question is about something else, and that is, let's say they have a division of labor in their marriage, and he wants to, until he tells her, or until he divorces her, he would like, that part of it to continue. Is he allowed to do that, or is that also misleading and despicable?
But he might at a certain time change his mind.
No. That's if he changes his mind, then these halachos will change.
No, but the cantor's point is relevant because, in other words, maybe by being with her, he'll reconsider his decision. Meaning, maybe he'll go in thinking
it's not. I mean,
and come out with why.
No. I mean, he's had plenty of time, in this marriage. If he's come to a definitive conclusion that he's divorcing,
how do you define definitive? I don't know how you define definitive. It's such a.
I think most people.
A lot of people make definitive changes, and they.
So when he unchanges,
they never execute on them, ever.
When he unchanges, then we'll revisit.
Rabbi Rosensweig, I'm thinking about the question of Devarim Shebelei, which occurs often in halacha.
Right.
In tefillah, for example, in making a neder, for example.
Right. This isn't Devarim Shebelei. This is he has come definitively to the conclusion that he's not continuing his life. And the question is
he can also change his mind.
If he changes his mind, it's not irrevocable.
But why do you not call it Dvarim Shebelev?
Because it's not. Dvarim Shebelev is a question that's more comparable to what everybody's asking. In other words, let's say I enter into a transaction and I don't spell out the details of the conditions, but they're Dvarim Shebelev. I know what, but I didn't spell them out, and I could change my mind. That's called Dvarim Shebelev, about which we say Dvarim Shebelev Einam Dvar. However, we're not talking about that here. We're talking about something that's different in two ways. Number one, at the moment I'm planning to get divorced, and based on my state of mind, definitively, I'm not in a state of mind where physical intimacy would continue to be viewed as sanctification of the marriage. Anybody who's definitively in his mind. Now, again, if he changes his mind tomorrow, then the next day he's back in his marriage, right? Yeah. But we're not talking about long-term consequences. As long as his state, that's why it's not Dvarim Shebelev. Dvarim Shebelev, Dvarim Einam Dvar means I did a transaction at a moment in time, a legal transaction. Number one, it's a legal and monetary transaction, typically, not a issue of sanctity. Number two, there's a moment, and the question is whether or not in that moment this transaction is binding, or according to the unspoken, thinking or conditions, that he, that impelled him. We're not talking about that at all here. We're talking about there's a marriage. Let's understand what we're talking about. The physical relationship of the marriage is not viewed as some sort of license. It's viewed as an expression of the sanctity of that marriage. And the point is that at this point in time, this person has decided to get divorced, right? And he's not thinking maybe I'll get divorced. He's come to a conclusion that he's.
I would say until he talks to his divorce lawyer and he runs the financials, it means nothing. Okay. Maybe he could be angry. He could be in a bad mood. What does it mean?
As long as he's in a bad mood or angry and thinking certain, and we're not taking bets whether he goes through with it. And if he doesn't go through with it, there's no harm done.
What about if the wife is angry? What about if the wife is angry? Does that apply to her also? Let's say she wants to get divorced. Is this conversation only about the man or about the woman? Or we only care about the man
because the man is the one who controls the process. But the Rambam in Hilchos Surah and Hilchos Gerushin also speaks about the fact that if a husband and wife are angry at each other, any situation in which there is, a sense of anger or whatever is inappropriate for the sanctity of the marriage. So there is actually that aspect. Anyways, the Ravid's view is as follows. The Ravid's view is that this Gemara is not about living together. This Gemara is about continuing, the efficient arrangements of their, housekeeping or, their, domestic arrangement, in terms of, splitting functions, in the household. And the Ravid says that even that, if he's decided to divorce her, he has no right to exploit. However, says the Ravid, if he informs her and she is willing to continue the, economic arrangement, notwithstanding his admission that he's intending to divorce her, says the Ravid, then under those conditions, that would be permissible. The implication in the Ravid is that if he were to tell her, I intend to divorce you, and she were to agree nonetheless to continue their physical relationship, according to the Ravid, it sounds like that would not be permissible. What's the difference? The difference is, in one case, we're talking about an economic relationship, and we're talking about economic exploitation. As far as that is concerned, she can acquiesce. She could say, well, I'm, mivateret, I, waive my rights. In the case of the, continuation of the intimate part of the marriage, that isn't just up to them. That's, where the halacha itself weighs in and considers it to be a davar shebekdusha, considers it to be inappropriate and a violation of the sanctity. So what's interesting about all this, if you look at the Rambam, I'm just going to read you the Rambam for a moment.
So again, the question I asked, where they both are getting divorced and they want to be together, the Rambam would say they can't.
The Ravid said that they can. The Ravid said that they can't. The Ravid said if they want to continue their domestic economic arrangement, and they both agree for now, that they can do. Now, the Rambam is very interesting. The Rambam says the following. There's another Gemara. Is a person allowed to get married, when at the outset he plans to get divorced at a certain point in time? Let's say I'm getting married and I intend to get divorced in a year. Is that acceptable or not?
You are talking about a t'nai here.
Not a t'nai, but that's his intention. Is that acceptable or not?
Is it her intention also? Let's say she agrees.
Oh, okay, good. So that's what we're talking. That's what I'm trying to show you here. Now, let's say the following case. Let me tell you some. I'll read you the Rambam here. The Rambam in Perek Yud Hilchos Gerush and Halacha Chaf Aleph says, "Lo yisa adam isha." Right, a person should not marry v'daita legarsha with the intention to divorce. Right, v'lo tia yosheves tachtav umisham shaso v'daita legarsha. Moreover, if he is married and now he wants to get divorced, that's the halacha we just read. That's the halacha of our Gemara. He's not allowed to continue his intimate relationship with her once he has reached this conclusion, as long as he's reached this conclusion. Then the Rambam says, "V'lo yigaresh adam ishto rishona elam kein matzah ba'ervas davar." That's our Mishnah. Shenemar ki matzah ba'ervas davar. Ve'ein ra'ui l'maher l'shaleach ishto harishona. He shouldn't be so quick to divorce, especially his first wife. Aval shniya im sneya yishalchena, unless there really is a toxic relationship between them. So if you look at the Rambam here, the Rambam says you cannot get married with the intention of divorce, they cannot continue their physical relationship once a decision has been made to get divorced. If you look at the Rambam in Hilchos Isurei Bia, the Rambam repeats the first halakha. There he says, "Lo yisa adam isha v'daita legarsha," but if she knows about it and she agrees, then it's acceptable. However, when it comes to the second halacha of lo tia yoshevas tachtav mishamshaso v'daita legarsha, there the Rambam does not say if it's acceptable to her, then it's okay. Now, let me just add one other thing. There's a pasuk in the Torah that says, "Lo yeh kadesh b'bnei Yisrael, lo siya kadesha." Person cannot be a kadesha. What is a kadesh and a kadesha? Also, psukim in Parshas Kitetse. So there are all sorts of interesting views, a very heated debate. If you look in the pasuk in Parshas Kitetse, lo yeh kadesh, lo siya kadesha, it means to behave, in some sort of a promiscuous, inappropriate way, right? Everybody has a different perush. Rashi, Ramban, Rambam, everybody has a different perush. Rab Sajigon, that's one of the earliest perushim that we have. Rab Sajigon says, you know what Kadesh and Kadesha is? It's when a person gets married and they're already planning their divorce. That's what a Kadesh and a Kadesha is. Anyways, the basic idea, I remember we spent some time on talking about Machzir Grushasa.
What is the difference between that and the Mekadesh al T'nai? No.
Mekadesh al T'nai means I marry you, but the marriage is contingent upon you giving me $100. That's you're not marrying on condition.
So how about I'll marry you, but it's contingent on my divorce, our separating, and I'm divorcing you after a year.
Right. So that's what Sajigon considers that to be Kadesh and Kadesha. And the Rambam doesn't call it Kadesh and Kadesha, but the Rambam is saying Lo Yisada Isha V'daita Legarsha. Well, I don't think making it tonight of it.
Even if he specifies at the beginning that he wants to.
No, we're talking about the Rambam
marry
says
for
that,
1 year.
Right.
Isn't that a different situation?
No, so if he's explicit about it and she agrees, the Rambam in Hilchos Isurei Bia says that's okay. Others say even then it's not okay. So again, all these cases are cases that are testing basically the sanctity of a marriage. It goes back to it goes back to Jacob, what you said earlier, which is, until you're not married, you're married, and then all the legalities and nothing changes. You could have said that. What we see from the halacha is that's not exactly true. So, and why? Because the whole marriage is based on sanctity, and there are times, depending on the state of mind of people, where that sanctity, is more than absent. And when that is the case, we have to be careful to protect the integrity of the marriage. So I'll just give you another example of this. So that's a question. The intent to divorce, when it's definitive, again, if he retracts it, he retracts it. Until he retracts it, he should not be, involved on a certain level, in his marriage. That's the point. So just to give you another example of this, if you look at the Mar Makomos, the previous set for a moment, look at the Gemara in Masechet Nedarim. Everybody have that? This would be on page. This would be on page 7. The Gemara says as follows: Amar Rabbi. Does everybody have this? On whoever has page 7. This is a Gemara in the Nedarim Daf Chaf Amud Beis. This Gemara says as follows: Amar Rabbi, Al yishte adam bekozeh v'yitain einav bekos acher. It's a euphemism. What the Gemara means is that if a person is in a marriage, right, and he is involved, he's in a living arrangement with a wife under the banner of Kiddushin, which is a davar shebikdusha, right? That he should not be thinking or planning, about involvement with someone else. That's a betrayal. Even if he's not doing anything, he's only, thinking. That is a betrayal as well. Amar Ravina. Ravina goes further and says, "Lo nitzracha ala afilu beis nashav." Even in a time when polygamy was permitted, and a person had 2 wives, this is part of the story of Yaakov and Leah and Rachel, right? Even then, there is a standard of sanctity that a person has to be scrupulous about. And that's the pasuk in Yechezkel that we were referring to before. Uvarosi machimikem hamordim va'poshim bi. If a person plays fast and loose with the institutions of marriage and the intimacy of marriage, right, then he's considered a moraid and a posheya. Again, before we were talking about machzuk grishasa, I think I got distracted. Machzuk grishasa means what? That if there is a divorce, and then there is a subsequent marriage to someone else, then you can't remarry that person. And we explained why is that given so much press? Because machzuk grishasa is exactly the cynical opposite of the sanctity of marriage and divorce. Meaning, the purpose of marriage is to provide a sanctified framework that elevates the relationship of husband and wife. The purpose of divorce is if sadly, right, that relationship does not endure.
8:30.
I don't know if I'm hearing a lot of static here.
Oh,
if the relationship does not endure, then then it requires a get. However, to use gittin and kiddushin as mechanisms that do the opposite of a sanctified relationship is cynical exploitation. So, for example, if you divorce somebody, so they can marry someone else, and then you're going to remarry them later, right? That's not what the institution of divorce is for. Similarly, if you're marrying somebody but you're already planning the divorce, obviously that's contrary to Kedusha. So what the Gemara says in the Darim is, Al yishta adam b'kozev yitin ala aleinu b'kos acher. There's a certain dignity and loyalty that marriage requires, which works even on the mental, even on the emotional, mental, intellectual level. And that's based on this pasuk. Amar Levi, Elu b'nei Teisha Midos, b'nei Osnat Mishagach. Those are Rashi Tevos. B'nei Ema, b'nei Anusa, b'nei Snua, b'nei Nidui, b'nei Tmura, b'nei Reriva, b'nei Shikrus, b'nei Grushas Halev, b'nei Arvuvia, b'nei Chatzufa. We're not going to go into each one of them, but the common denominator of all of these are, unless there is a harmonious, respectful, dignified relationship between husband and wife, then their life together, right, becomes basically a kind of exploitation. And it's not true that once there's a marriage, anybody can do anything they want as long as they're not technically, violated. So if it's b'nei anusa, b'nei senua, b'nei mariva, people having, terrible fights and arguments, all these things figure in to the propriety of the interactions between them. And the halakha has very high standards for this. So what is b'nei ema, for example? Look at the Ran. Loshon yira shematil ema alishto hizakek loshalo kirtzona. Like a person is, tries to be intimidating, and that kind of has impact on the relationship between that. That's a violation of the sanctity of the marriage. B'nei anusa, gri tzvei b'nei ema. The b'nei ema lo have anusa mamish. He forces his attentions, within the marriage. That's totally unacceptable. B'nei snua. What is b'nei snua? Shasona umitoch kach nosein dato al isha cheres. Right? He's not even planning to divorce, but he, in a state of enmity, right? And kind of in a disrespectful way, that undermines the ishas, right? Okay. What is b'nei meriva? This is what you asked me before. Let's say people are in a state of hostility, right? B'nei shikrus, drunkardness. Shemitoch shikrus eno no saying daito al ishto. And what's b'nei grushas halev? Shegamar belibo lagarsha. Meaning he has concluded that he's going to divorce. So if he's concluded that he's going to divorce, right, all of these constitute al yishta adam b'kos zeviyitin eno b'kos acher. All of these come under the rubric of the pasuk in Yecheskel of Arosi Mikem Amordim, the Haposhim B. So in some cases, if there's an agreement between both of them, some of the poskim say, well, if they both agree, so, she not being exploited because she's in agreement. And others say, even if there's an agreement, objectively, this doesn't constitute a sanctified environment. And consequently, it's even if formally the marriage remains, right, it undercuts that sense of appropriate interaction, that is necessary for davar shebekdusha. So in light of all of this, we can kind of return a little bit to the discussion of Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, and Rabbi Akiva. Before I continue, is everybody following so far?
Yeah. So what's their core machlokas if she's in it on it? What's the machlokas? In other words, one side is saying that if she doesn't know, it's not permitted. The other side is saying if she knows,
if she doesn't know that you talking about the divorce now?
Yeah.
Everybody agrees that
it works both ways. Yeah.
No. If he intends to divorce, and that's his firm decision at the moment, as long as that's his firm decision, then and he doesn't reveal that, then there's a not a lav in the Torah, but we're quoting these psukim in Yechezkel and Mishlei. We're saying then he should not be involved, and if to be involved at that time in intimate relationship is basically a violation of the sanctity of the marriage. Now, if he tells her,
what does that mean, a violation of the marriage? You're over a law? What does that really mean?
Get involved.
There's no lav,
This
but
guy will never let him finish.
The psukim in Yechezkel say that this person is a moraid, and a posheya, right?
He's a moraid and a posheya. Okay.
No one wants to be according to the psukim in Nevi'im, a moraid and a posheya, right? Meaning this is inappropriate behavior in the extreme. Okay.
Okay. And if she consents,
if she consents, that's a debate in the poskim in Shulchan Aruch. So if the problem is simply genevas das, or it's her personal dignity and exploitation, then maybe if she agrees, if they both are consenting, then that would be okay. However, the other side of the coin is whether they both agree or not. In the end of the day, they're just using their marriage, as a license,
inappropriate way,
in an inappropriate way, and therefore, without the long-term commitment, right, then their behavior is still inappropriate.
So she's called a posheya also, like the same thing you said, whatever.
It's focusing on him mostly, but I don't know whether she's called a posheya, but it would
equal
be
right. We should focus on her also.
So let me read now the Migdal David. If you look at the new Marmar,
this bothers me, Rabbi Rosensweig. The Gemara, I believe, in the beginning of Kiddushin, asks what do we mean by Mekudeshes?
Right.
The answer is Asur al Yalma.
Asur kula alma kehekdesh.
Yes. So the Kiddushin of marriage is defined in this negative way.
Well, not only.
When we talk about Kiddushin as being having to do with Kiddusha, is there a passage somewhere in the Gemara to the effect that Kiddusha has not only a negative connotation, but a positive connotation as well?
Well, I mean, all these,
it's very nice. We can generate some of these ideas out of our own heads. But
we're not generating of their own heads. Everything we're saying is a Gemara and a Rambam and a Rishon.
But do they use the word Kiddusha and they're violating the Kiddusha of the marriage, or they're violating the commitment of the marriage? I mean, is there a special status of Kiddusha in that sense? According to the Gemara.
The phrase that we use in the Birchas Ha'eresin, is Mekadesh.
Amo Yisrael al-Yedei Kiddushin.
And that doesn't mean Asara Kula Alma Kehekdesh. That means that this is a sanctified state. The word Kiddushin may also mean, Asara Kula Alma Kehekdesh, but certainly the word Mekadesh Amo Yisrael al Yedei Chupa v'Kiddushin is not just about, again, because Kiddushin is a sanctified state, that's the reason that we probably compare it to Hekdesh and therefore say the Asar Kula Alma Hekdesh, namely that you can't have a heter labal at the same time that you have a heter, to anyone else. But certainly the language of Mekadesh Amo Yisrael Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al hara Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvosav is
which means by the performance of a mitzvah. And there's no question that the Kiddushin between a man and a woman exemplifies a mitzvah mediraisa by the Torah.
Well, I mean, again, whether you count it as a mitzvah, most Rishonim do. The Rosh doesn't, because he sees it as a means for Pirya Baribia. He doesn't have, he has a different view on what the bracha is. But the Nusach HaBracha, Asher Kiddishanu, b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu, is certainly a reflection that we treat this as a sanctified.
Well, what aspect of the whole thing? Every aspect of the
Not every aspect. We're talking about again when we want to say that inappropriate behavior is considered to be verboten. Remember, we say lo yeh kadesh and lo tiyeh kadesha, which are the opposite of kedusha. Right? So we're talking about a very specific thing. Where does the Rambam put Hilchos Isurei Bia? In what sefer? Of the Yad Chazaka. Yad Chazaka.
Yeah.
Sefer Kedusha. Isurei Bia is in Hilchos, is in Sefer Kedusha. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming, but the
Rabbi, may I insert?
As for just one more second, but as for the distinction,
but notice it's Isurei Bia that is emphasized in the Kedusha of marriage.
I mean, outside of marriage, the Rambam's view is that there's no Kedusha, and therefore everything is considered to be znus. That's the Rambam's especially particular view. What I'm saying is whether or not you consider these issues a betrayal of sanctity or a betrayal of commitment doesn't really matter to me so much. I mean, I'm just trying to show that the standards in marriage, for marriage, to be, fully manifest are very high. And that it's not just a technical question of whether or not, the marriage, is still applicable and binding, but that even within the marriage, the relationship and the avoidance of exploitation and absence of dignity, that these are all critical, components of the marriage itself. Now, to me, it's quite obvious that that's because marriage is Mekadesh Amar Yisrael al Yidei Chuppah v'Kiddushin, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvosav, the antithesis of Kadesh and Kadesha. But if you want to say that it's all about, you want to call it commitment, I'm okay with that too. It doesn't really matter to me. What I'm really trying to show is that, again, in contrast to, some of the pushback, which is fine, is that it's not correct to say that when a marriage is intact legally and formally, that attitudes are irrelevant or insignificant, because that's not true. The idea of Gerushas Halei,
not irrelevant and insignificant. It may not be relevant to Kedusha, which is a specific
to me, it's obvious
character.
that they're relevant to Kedusha. But if you want to say that that cynically manipulating, one partner by not, expressing intent, or even where the intent is known and there's, a mutual agreement, but the halacha still disapproves of, physical aspects of the relationship in a situation where the marriage, is imminently going to be terminated, or that the halacha is fundamentally opposed to a marriage which is preceded by the intention to divorce in time. All these are examples where technically and formally you have the structure of the marriage, but in all these cases, what you don't have is the dignity and the commitment. If you want to say dignity and commitment and not sanctity, I'm not sure why.
But
if you do, it doesn't matter to me. It's the same thing.
There could be an argument the other way, which is you either married or you're not. And if you're thinking of,
I know there could be an argument the other way, but what I'm demonstrating absolutely is that the halacha thinks that that's not correct.
That's stupid.
What?
No, she doesn't know she's on that we can hear. She thinks she's on
the concept of Gerushas Halev and so on is proof positive that when a marriage is technically and formally intact, it nonetheless doesn't have full license, when there's an absence of dignity, and what I call sanctity. That's clear.
But the other argument, Rabbi, just to finish, is it could, doing it this way, could force the divorce when it could be saved, because until it's over, it's not over. So by
then
saying,
people can always change their mind.
No. By saying,
I understand your argument, but the halacha is unequivocal. The idea of grusha.
Rabbi Roth brought up children and other things last week. I'm saying there are situations that are different. Like it's not black and white in every case, right?
Well, then maybe you're dealing with a situation where there's no definitive conclusion, but people are just having issues or they're thinking seriously. But as long as there is a definitive decision, even in time, even if it's ends up not lasting, then the halacha's conclusion, as codified in this Gemara right here at Tzadi Amud Aleph, and in the Gemara Nedarim Daf Chaf Amud Beis, and in the Rambam Perek Yud Hilchos Gerushin Halacha Chaf Aleph, and in the Rambam in Hilchos Isurei Bia, and in the Shulchan Aruch in several places as well, is that if there's a definitive conclusion, as long as that definitive conclusion remains, then there are limitations in the marriage. And that,
I would argue,
is very
what definitive is.
inspiring. I don't think it's problematic. I think it actually is very inspiring. But yeah.
No, it is inspiring. But the question is how you define definitive. Like, if he's about to sign the divorce papers tomorrow, I hear that. But if he hasn't even started discussions and he's years away.
That he doesn't, if you're saying he doesn't treat,
he's not serious.
If he's not serious, he's not serious. Then it doesn't apply. We're
talking
about
how do you define definitive? How do you define definitive?
It doesn't matter how you define it.
He's in a bad mood that day.
There are thresholds.
He's angry.
There are thresholds for certain people. A person. This is between him and himself.
Correct.
We're not talking about. He knows whether or not he's definitive or not. That's the point. As long as he thinks he's definitive, then for him to proceed is exploitive and is cynical. If he is fooling himself, then he's fooling himself. But as long as he's in a state where, from his own point of view, right, he is planning a divorce, not planning maybe to divorce, planning to divorce, right, then that is a sufficient state of mind that makes continuing the relationship, especially absent informing, cynical and exploitive and undignified and unsanctified. Now, again, you could say, oh, but let's say he's a wishy-washy person and he has a history that when he even thinks for himself, okay. I mean, we're not reading his mind, but what I'm saying is people who are decisive and who know what they want, they can change their mind, but they usually know, what they're thinking, in a moment. So that would be the point. Let me just read the Sefer Habatim for a minute, which is the beginning of, and then we'll finish up with this next week. One little last point, and then we'll move to the next Gemara. The Sefer Habatim we talked about the Meiri in the beginning of this year, right? So the Sefer Habatim is a much less well-known figure. His name was Rabbi David Kochavi, and he was also lived in Provence in southern France. He wrote works on the Rambam, kind of commentaries on the Rambam, including something called Migdal David, which is his expansion or commentary, kind of, on the Rambam's Sefer HaMitzvos. And he had a very interesting philosophical bent. So his insights, his commentary on Sefer HaMitzvos is always very fascinating. So listen to this. So next week we'll read Sefer Chinuch to finish up. Look, this is on page 1 of the new Mar Makomos. Mitzvah Reish Chav Gimel. Shenitztavenu legarish mishi yirtza legarish b'ksav. That's what the Rambam says. There's a mitzvah to divorce with a shtar. Who amaro yisparach the kosav l'sefer krisis. So now listen to how Rabbi David Kochavi explains this phenomenon of divorce. Inyan kavanas mitzvah zu. The purpose of this mitzvah, he says, mevuar shezel letikun seder b'nei adam. The purpose of the divorce is that it should be a constructive mechanism for people. The ofen amidasam, amesheyesh minatikun ushleimas hazivud. In the end of the day, the institution of divorce, I'll say parenthetically, which looks like a betrayal of the sanctity of the marriage, is in fact a constructive mechanism to support and to constructively protect the marriage. Why? Hilifamim titorer sina, the siba, the shalom, the siba, sadly, when dealing with human beings, occasionally, enmity will arise between a husband and wife. Sometimes besiba, sometimes there's a good reason, and sometimes there's no reason whatsoever, and just hostility, characterizes their relationship. And this enmity might be intensified until it reaches a point where it's more constructive to separate and distance these people from each other, right? Oh, yakena, oh, yahargena. If not, who knows? Maybe, physical violence will break out. Oh, yamdu kol yameim demastema, or just sadly, they'll live in armed camps, and each one's quality of life will be undermined because of the toxicity of their relationship. This is exactly what we've been talking about all along. Meaning, Hillel and Rabbi Akiva, instead of looking like trivializing, grounds for divorce, what they're really saying is that divorce is a investment in the sanctity and in the harmony, and we can say in the commitment of the marriage. Meaning, it's a necessary, unhappy, but necessary outlet. For people to be forced to stay together when they're in a state of enmity, and there's no, obviously, a conceivable way, to bring harmony, to reconcile between them, that would be the opposite of the Ribono Shel Olam's purpose in creation. Right? The purpose of marriage is the davak v'ishto v'hayel basarecha, that existential bond. How sad, how tragic that would be, right? If trying to protect it, caused greater suffering and pain, and exactly the opposite effect. And therefore, the halacha is complex and requires, and allows for divorce when that's the appropriate response. The gamim lo yarchikenu min hashchiva yahazera bilti nachon. And if they were to continue their physical relationship, right? This is a kind of a mystical idea, but it's not just a mystical idea. Hazera would be built, any children that would result, from this relationship, when the relationship was toxic, would be bilti nachon. So whether that's a mystical comment or it's a way of saying, when you bring children up in an environment which is completely toxic, then, psychologically you are, I wouldn't say dooming them, but you are, imposing formidable, psychological obstacles, in their pathway. So it looks like, we're doing it for a greater good, can also blow up in your face. What does he quote? Exactly the sugya that we just read. Bibnei Gerushas Halev, the Gemara Nadarim Chafam Beis, meaning the principle that if he has determined, absolutely right now that he is divorcing, then we separate him, physically, from the intimacy of his life. Lefika chaya mishlemus torasenu, not callous and not frivolous and not trivial, but mishlemus torasenu, eyuchal legarish osa lilo siba, even if it looks like there's no reason, because here's where I'll add what I've been saying. If he wants to divorce her for no reason, then obviously this relationship is really toxic. Ulalo davar lekavana shekasav. Rabbeinu Akadoshim asu tzastik dukim ifima sheba hakabala hamitis v'inin gerushin leman yerach ha'inyan. And the details of gittin reflect, in other words, these sensibilities. Ki lefamim titorer mastema tamod yoma yomayim o shavua v'achar kakit payes. Sometimes people will get into an argument, and their anger will last for 2 days or a week or more, and then finally they'll become reconciled. And in the recent generations, referring to things like Cherem Rabbeinu Gershom, some of the Gedolei Torah, realized the Ra'u Bavonosenu, Kilafi Erech Hagalos, Veheyosenu Amid Fozarim, Mufarad Benu Amim, No Debanu Midos Megunos, Ki Yalde Nachrim Naspi. The Asus Yagim Ugedarim Shalei Agarish Adam Daito, Kim Baskama Sacherim, Ideshi Shtadlu Lasim Atzas Shalem Beneam. That's why they made takanos that, the divorce should not just be Judaism and Torah, unilateral, but it should be based on, the, joint decision of husband and wife, or the consultation of the Bezdin, and so on. The understanding of the nature of Jewish marriage, again, you want to call it commitment and loyalty, or you want to call it sanctity, whatever you want to call it, that those principles, he said, were well understood. Very fascinating, Sefer Batim. At the time of Matan Torah, everybody understood these things. And therefore, there was no requirement to have the takanos or the charamim of Rabbeinu Gershom and others. However, since time has gone on and we live in non-Jewish environments, and we have, been acculturated, to a more frivolous, or less sanctity or commitment-driven, concept of ishus, now it became necessary to impose, more limits. Sometimes we're very unhappy with a husband who, for reasons that don't seem very compelling, decides to divorce his wife. Right? Especially if we're talking about a birth marriage, which structurally, has the potential for such idealism, right? The people who've gone through, from the time they were practically, young adults, they've gone through so much that in theory should bind them and bond them together, which is, by the way the Sefer Chinuch explains, the first year of marriage is a special obligation, special mitzvah for the young couple to spend extra time together. And like national service doesn't apply, like the army or whatever, all as an investment in this relationship. If a person casually divorces his first wife, even the Mizbeach cries. Just like karbanos also take into consideration human nature and the need to express it this way. And so on. Ulai nasan libo ba'acheres, alami prutza ora'a, osheni achaladurima, azum rabosenu shemitzvah l'garsha. So the Sefer Batim says, listen, if the divorce, betokens his insensitivity and his use of marriage as a cover simply for personal pleasure and for a casual relationship, then that is despicable, and then we are critical of him. If it's because she betrays the marriage and behaves in a manner inconsistent with its integrity, then on the contrary, mitzvah l'garsh. Okay, I'm not going to read till the end, but he also suggests one other thing that the Chinuch suggests, and that is one of the reasons for there being a text and so many requirements of the get is to slow down the process, right? And so that, cooler heads will prevail. So as much as possible, we can promote, reconciliation, harmony, and kind of at least motivate people to rethink, to reassess their, a decision which might.
But that's the opposite of what we've been learning. We're saying we don't want them to be intimate. So that's a.
No, it's not the opposite. If somebody has decided to get divorced, then he can still wait as long as he wants. What we're saying is, don't exploit the lack of knowledge of the other person, to manipulate them.
I'm talking a case where she knows.
Well, she knows that's a debate. But even according to the view that that's inappropriate, says, yeah, it's still a marriage in which the hostility and the toxicity between them is such that he wants to get divorced. And therefore, the intimate manifestation of their life is inappropriate at this point, and it remains inappropriate. That's different than, the question of, he's angry, some discord took place, and should he rush to divorce, or do we want to slow him down so that he can, consider, all the good as well? Okay, so that's one. The other one, the next one is the Malbim, which I'm not going to read now, but the idea of the Malbim, I think I mentioned in the past, is the following. The Malbim says, listen, it may look like Hillel and Rabbi Akiva are making it easy to get divorced, but really, again, it's an investment in the strength of the marriage, and it's really also an investment in the endurance of the marriage. And then he gives the mashal. He says, if you're quarantined in your home, then you feel trapped, and your home becomes your jail. And when you are in your home, right, you develop a negative perspective on your home because it's your jail. But if you're on vacation, if somebody gives you a vacation, that same home, becomes a utopia. I can be home for a few days. That's the Malbim's understanding of Hillel and Rabbi Akiva. Meaning, if you know that you have an exit strategy, then you are motivated, to really think clearly, about your options, and that also accentuates the good, in a marriage. And then your decision to stay, knowing that you can leave, strengthens the marriage. Had there been the halacha that the grounds were so restrictive, like they are for Beis Shammai, or that we imposed, this life sentence, that any small discord, would be perceived, as catastrophic. It would be blown out of proportion, and the perspective would be that you are incarcerated, in a marriage. So psychologically, says the Malbim, the best way to invest in marriages, right, is to allow choice, when it comes to continuing the relationship. So these are very interesting ideas, obviously. Okay, we'll finish up with the last couple of lines of the Gemara, and then I want to talk about one other sugya in the beginning of this parak, 9th parak, the idea of, again, divorcing out of love, and then I want to go back to talk about
divorcing out of love.
Yes, like a person who's going to war, he's going,
or he's sick, or he's dying,
and he's concerned that his wife, might be an aguna, or a person who's very ill, and he's worried that his wife might be subject to yibum. I want to talk about that briefly also. Okay, have a great week, everybody. Sorry,
Rabbi Rosensweig, could I just ask one last? It's too late, obviously, to get into it. But everything tonight has really been spoken about, or almost everything, from the point of view of the man's will and man's action and man's initiation.
Yeah.
Would we say that the wife, the woman, has the same privileges or responsibilities?
Well, on a biblical level, the husband is the one who initiates the marriage, and he's the one who initiates the divorce. And that's the reason why the focus is on him, because we're trying to, slow down or speed up. The reason that there's so much focus on him is for that reason. In the aftermath of Rabbeinu Gershom's Cherem, which is what the Sefer HaBatim was speaking about, Rabbeinu Gershom, established that going forward, there was no unilateral divorce, but that divorce is something that requires the consent of husband and wife. So in the post-Rabbeinu Gershom era, but not the Talmud, but that's, the medieval period, yes, a lot of these issues then end up being shared by husband and wife. It's in the biblical period where the focus is on him legally. But as you could hear earlier, the concern in most cases, we're talking about him and what he does and what he thinks and so on and so forth, because he has biblically the ability to unilaterally divorce, and she does not. However, the sensitivities are all about her. They're not about him. I mean, it's about her exploitation. It's about her feelings.
But like Henry's question,
subject to some sort of gneva stas, being tricked, etc.
Yes.
But in the post-Rabbeinu Gershom era, it ends up that a lot of these things are pretty, I wouldn't say all things, but a lot of the things are pretty much equal, because the divorce requires both of their consent.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else before we go?
I had a question, Rabbi, but it's late and I don't want to stop you from learning yourself or whatever it is, but if I may take a minute.
Sure.
מקדש עמו ישראל על ידי חופה וקידושין. That talks about kiddushin.
Right.
But basically we have the...
It talks about,
and we have the pasuk, Ki am kodosh ata LaHashem Elokecha.
Right.
You are a holy person. What does the kiddushin, the מקדש עמו ישראל על ידי חופה וקידושין, what there was no kedusha of Am Yisrael before the brocha or before the marriage of a couple?
No. But let me say it in this way. But I think of Sajagon, if you look at the Ran in Masachet Ketubot and Daf Zayin, which is where the Gemara speaks about the Birchas Erusin and this Nusach and so on. So he asks the question, why is it that the bracha of marriage, the Chatima is Mekadesh Amo Yisrael Ayidei Chubam? After all, aren't there many mitzvot that are, related to, Kedusha? No one's suggesting that this is the only mitzvah related to Kedusha, but he's asking the question a little bit differently than you, but very similarly to you. And that is, why is the mitzvah of Kedushin particularly, characterized in terms of Kedusha? And he doesn't really answer. My answer is because Birchas Erusin and Kiddushin in particular is a great exemplification of Kedushas Yisrael, for the reasons I've been discussing tonight and elsewhere. And particularly the Birchas Erusin. Because the idea of the Erusin prior to the Nisuin, which is the unique contribution of Jewish law, of Matan Torah to marriage in the world, because non-Jewish marriage, as we discussed last week or a couple of weeks ago, it just requires, the consensual physical intimacy of husband and wife, and that's called marriage. They go straight to chuppah. They don't have erusin. We have erusin prior to kiddushin, but the erusin, on the one hand, distances husband and wife first because it legalizes and formalizes their relationship. It's a step back, which is an investment in a step forward, meaning the step back, their physical intimacy doesn't begin at erusin, because first it's important to establish that there is a kinyan between them, meaning that they have mutual rights and obligations, that define this marriage. And only in the second stage, do we actually consummate, the bond, physically, and also in terms of what it symbolizes, Baal ki ishto, ishto ki Baal, etc. And in my opinion, that is a perfect exemplification of Kedushas Yisrael. I mean, it's the idea of Kedusha as Prisha, but not Prisha, meaning separating or taking a step back, but not for the sake of asceticism, not because the physical bond of husband and wife, or any other physical pleasure that is permitted in the Torah, not because that is b'diavad, but because in order to elevate it and make it lechatchila, you first have to invest in it, by instilling these limits, all of which we're speaking about tonight, frankly, of protecting the dignity of husband and wife, the rights of husband and wife each, before you proceed. And therefore, we say Mekadesh Amo Yisrael, the general principle of Kedusha, Kedoshim Tiyu, right? Ki Kadosh Ani Hashem Elokechem, Am Kadosh LaHashem Elokecha, is a microcosm of that. An important microcosm of that is reflected in family life, in the way that Jews get married, based on everything that we've been saying. I would say also on the way that they get divorced. Also,
yeah.
But right, it's an exemplification of this idea of discipline and rules and laws and protecting mutual rights and mutual dignity, as the first step towards sanctifying and elevating, physical bond as well. So that's what
it's an excellent statement that you made now.
Okay, thank you. Have a good week, everybody, and we'll finish this up and move on next week.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.